Hi, I'm Caroline Payson. I'm the Director of Education here at Cooper-Hewitt, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to our 2008 National Design Awards jury panel. This is the first of a series of events that we offer in conjunction with the National Design Awards and National Design Week, which is our largest educational endeavor here at the museum. National Design Week begins on October 20th, and that week includes a series of events which include a teen design fair, an open house for educators, a winners panel, which is a nice bookend to this, free admission for the public, and of course the centerpiece of that week is the National Design Awards Gala. For those of you who would like your own voice heard, National Design Week and the Gala will also include the announcement of the People's Design Award, which will launch in September, and during that time, you're all welcome and encouraged to add your own favorite designs or vote on someone else's. The National Design Awards and National Design Week this year, as in the past 2 years, are made possible by the generous support of Target. I just want to remind everyone that this event this evening is also being broadcast live on our website and will be archived on our website, so in case you want to repeat it or recommend it to friends, it will be at cooperhewitt.org. The other thing that we've just added this week on www.cooperhewitt.org is a blog that goes along with the National Design Awards. So we're looking at this evening as the beginning of a conversation that we want to continue, and the website is your place to do that. The National Design Awards honor the best in American design across disciplines. And given the cross-disciplinary nature of the process and the discussion, it's also, I think, a really important opportunity to shine a light on this moment in design. And I've done this, this is my third year here, and it's the third time I've gone through the jury process. And each time, within the criteria, the jury comes up with a different philosophy of what matters to them. And this year's jury came up, I think, focused on several things. One was interaction within and across communities, conviction, craftsmanship, and impact. And by impact, it was, I think, very important to this jury that that be not only within the design world, but with the general public at large. But before I announce the winners, I want to talk a little bit about the selection process. This year, we solicited nominations from more than 1,500 designers, educators, journalists, and cultural figures and corporate leaders who came from all 50 states. Those nominees were then asked to submit statements and portfolios for review by the jury. And something you all might not know is that part of the eligibility criteria is that the designer has been working professionally for at least 7 years. The jury, of course, who I'll introduce in a second, is composed of leaders in the field chosen by the museum. And through the jury process, winners and finalists are selected based on their sustained body of work that shows excellence, innovation, and long-term impact, and their lasting contribution to design. And again, having experienced this for several years, I think given the scale of the nomination process, it's important to recognize that it's an honor not just to win, but that being named a finalist is also an extraordinary achievement. In the past several years, the awards have grown exponentially, both in terms of the nominations as well as the translation from nomination to submission. And with our new online submission form, we're looking forward to that increasing as well next year. Now I'm really delighted to present the winners. There is on your chair a press release which has the winners and the finalists, so you can, with a little bio, so you're welcome to either follow along or take that with you to fill out my announcements. The Corporate Achievement Award is presented to Google. The Design Mind Award is presented to Michael BIERUT. The Architecture Design Award is presented to Tom KUNDIG. The Interior Design Award is presented to the ROCKWELL Group. The Communication Design Award is presented to Scott STOWELL. The Landscape Design Award is presented to OLIN Partnership. Product Design goes to Antenna Design. The Fashion Design Award is presented to RUCCI. And finally, the Lifetime Achievement Award is presented to industrial designer Charles Harrison. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to our jurors. We have one in transit, Jamie Carpenter, who will join us when he gets here. But I'll go ahead with his bio, because if he gets here, he's the first in alphabetical order. He's the principal of James Carpenter Design Associates and is known for expanding the artistic and technical potential of light and glass. He's taught widely, including at Harvard Graduate School of Design and MIT, and his current work includes the tower enclosure at 7 World Trade Center, the Time Warner Center in New York, and the building exterior for the Gucci headquarters in Tokyo. He is a 2002 winner of the National Design Award for Environment Design, a 2004 MacArthur Fellowship recipient, and a 2006 AIA Institute Honors Award winner. Mark Robbins is the Dean of Syracuse University School of Architecture, where he's been since 2004, and his work bridges art and architecture and explores social and political forces that contribute to the built environment. He's formerly the Director of Design at the National Endowment for the Arts, and his most recent book, Households, is a collection of photography published by the Monticelli Press in 2006. Raquel Tudela is the Global Creative Director at Bloomberg LP in New York. Prior to working at Bloomberg, she worked as a graphic designer, and at Bloomberg, she leads projects on core branding and multimedia design, and she oversaw the construction of Bloomberg's New York office, which was completed 3 years ago. Unfortunately, some of our other jurors have not been able to come tonight. They include Francisco Costa, Creative Director of the Calvin Klein Collection for Women, Camilo Pardo, who is the Design Chief of the Special Vehicle Team in Living Legends Studio for the Ford Motor Company, Georgiana Stout, a former winner and the founding partner and creative director of 2x4, Lauren Zelaznik, the president of Bravo Media and Oxygen Media, and our jury chair, Tim Brown, CEO and president of IDEO. If the jurors could join me on stage. If you were to look at these selections, I'm just trying to make sure I don't sound like a liar with my previous statement. So if you're looking at these statements as a whole and saying that it's not only about the individual winners, but that the jury also is making a statement about contemporary design, what would that statement be?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Raquel. I appreciate that so much. Well, you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about the process that we all went through, and I was on the subway yesterday and looking at one of the cars designed by Antenna Design. And I thought about the way in which the jury is constituted, and it's multiple. It wasn't as if we had architects selecting architects or people in media selecting media. It was a cross-disciplinary jury which necessitated the work to read across disciplines. Mm-hmm. So in some way it's a kind of risky proposition, mm-hmm. right? Because you can't rely on the vocabularies that are specific to your discipline. You need to rely on the fact that the work needs to appeal at least to a kind of broadly literate mm-hmm. Audience, but not necessarily people for whom your specific histories and vocabulary would read. So mm-hmm. It's hard to think of other multidisciplinary award programs that actually kind of highlight this kind of work in that kind of way.
And do you think that by having that, it did sort of make you draw conclusions in that interdisciplinary way?
Well, it's funny. I guess you always then have to question how work communicates, how work is read, mm-hmm. and so I don't know that a kind of simple through line mm-hmm. is evident in the work that we've selected, because in some way all of the awards are about privileging people who have done sort of extraordinary things, either over a lifetime or in the past sort of 10 years. There are some very young designers here. So it would be probably inappropriate to say that the kind of through line is that we found people who were all socially conscious, or people who were all using new materials, or people who were invested in a certain sort of design approach.
Yeah, I think that adding to Mark's comments about part of what happens is, I know a little about architecture or fashion design, or, we don't belong to the same design worlds in a way. So for people coming to see things that are very far from their world of knowledge, it's more like the immediate draw of the impact that it causes, to you. And you say, without knowing that much about the designers, and I think that's a very pure way of looking at it. It's like, what impact does it cause on the group of people? Some people knew a lot more about, the field, so they brought a bit of the history behind the things, but maybe that influenced, or that didn't influence at all. So I think it was much more about, it was very interesting in that sense that we were all so different. So we looked at it immediately like, yes, no, and when things were such a cohesive, yes, this one, it was very strong, because everybody was impacted by one designer specifically for a field. I mean, we struggled in all the fields, because there were amazing people presenting, but some of them stood out immediately. So I think that that was a very, very important part of the experience of the jury being so different and looking at design that way. It was great.
Well, as someone who sat in the jury room who didn't vote, one of the words that came up, I think, very often was the word impact. And whether it was the immediate impact it had on the jurors or the impact that the designer had.
I think it's, overall, it's just harder every day in the world to get moved and impacted by something, because we see so much, we read so much, there's so many things online and so many things that are accessible. So when you see something that really strikes you, you can't, overlook it. You have to say this is something special, especially because of the field of people we're all in, like the creative world. So we see tons of things, and getting really, struck by somebody's work, it becomes really something.
But it's interesting. More often than not, though, when we went through our first round of eliminations, there was such a general sense of agreement, even when you were looking at work that wasn't in your discipline. So if I was looking at fashion, or a fashion designer was looking at a piece of architecture, or a piece of media design, there were only a couple of categories where there was a kind of huge debate. And so it was interesting and probably surprising that there was as much agreement, and often from the initial moment of seeing the work, that it just kind of translated. And so there is that I guess the impact of good work, whether we're looking at art or thinking about music or thinking about what used to be called the applied arts, a way in which that has a kind of is able to elicit a response.
I just realized this, with just the two of you, it's like your worst nightmare of a class where someone's going to go, and you. One of the other things I thought that was interesting this year, and
one of us could walk.
Is that this year's jury, and I think this relates to your conversation about things being an immediate agreement about what was good, and then some fights about then differentiating amongst a small number. This jury asked if you could actually change some of what we did to the categories, and in fact added finalists to a couple of categories. One was corporate achievement, and the other was design mind. Do you want to talk, which is unusual, to decide that we needed to sort of broaden that and recognize the finalists. I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about what led you to that decision.
We couldn't choose. We won all of them. I think it was, the draw was more like, it seems there was a lot of people who had to be rewarded, and it was very difficult to just single one out. In corporate achievement, it's like this, again, there's so many people out there, and we thought there was very strong competitors, and then very hard to put them one next to the other. They're very different fields that they were addressing. You can consider one was globally massive, and the other one has a smaller audience that they appeal to, but at the same time, the impact is tremendous for their. So for us was like, it's hard to compare some of them, though they are in the same field, and I think that we felt very strongly that, they should be rewarded. I mean, we know you had to pick one, which we were very happy with the decision, but, we wanted not to leave the other areas that we thought there had been amazing impact. So that's how it came along. We felt strongly about that.
I think this also kind of reinforces the importance of the awards in general, because this is the only marking that we have on a national level for design in this country. And certainly design is critical here, and it's a large industry, but it also has an impact on our kind of day-to-day lives. It seemed that the more people that could be recognized, and as Raquel said, if you're looking at someone who's written about kind of urban theory, and then you're looking at someone who's written about graphic design or been a kind of leading graphic designer, they really represent sort of different phylums, but are as significant. And this kind of opens up the field and allows the Cooper-Hewitt to kind of mark these people in a kind of broader way, which seemed important. I think the jury was very aware that this is as close as we get to a kind of national conversation or national presentation of designers. And I think as designers, we always feel somehow that we're not part of broad-based media culture. And this is a way that the work of people like Charles Harrison, people, I could hear people react when you saw the kind of Viewmaster. I love that, Viewmaster, just think about the association. So, and then to see the face of the person who designed this thing that most people in this room would be familiar with, but to actually realize, oh yes, somebody designed that, somebody was part of a kind of corporation, somebody was at Sears and designed these things. And so that's a significant part of being on the jury, and it's a significant part of, I think, why the awards themselves are so important.
Some of the comments that we've been hearing are that some of the winners sort of blurred the boundaries between design and art, and some of their work is absolutely more conceptual in nature. What are the differences between the two in your minds?
I'm trying to think of the actual work that I feel that was that conceptual.
This came up, I know when we talked about antenna, so back to the kind of subway design. So in some way it was kind of straighter industrial design or straighter product design, but then they also did the window installation at Bloomingdale's with these the flowers that responded. And so in some way that was very much like an art piece. You could think about artists who experiment with media and with kind of interactive technologies. And so the work goes beyond either selling a specific thing or accomplishing a specific function, and goes closer to the realm that we generally associate with art, and that's creating an affect, creating a relationship between a thing or a series of things and a viewer.
Yeah, and I think that, trying to think about the concept overall, but like design, back in the day it was called commercial arts in a way. It was more driven as a profession. There was more to fulfill the client's needs, and art seemed always to be your own creation that whoever liked it could take it. So it was approached very different. And I think when there's a bit of a cross of being able to be more artsy with your design, and still, I think Häagen-Dazs was the sponsor of that window, or the one who requested it. Great. I mean, it's for the designer. I think it's it's the free moment to be a bit more loose and still be able to do design and be seen as art, maybe. And
but I remember this came up in other kind of more complex ways. We were looking at an animation, and we were very taken by an animation. It was kind of beautiful. And I remember the discussion on the jury was, well, should we award this because, it seems fantastic to do this abstract work, but isn't it harder to tie animation to specific title design or a kind of product placement? And isn't that what we should be looking at rather than art? And so there was a discussion among the jury about what it was we were looking at here. And so there wasn't always a kind of clear-cut agreement about the kinds of work that we should be selecting.
Excuse me.
It's going to go.
What? Yes. And I think actually the advantage of having such a small group is we'll get to your questions even sooner. So,
with great relish.
yes.
For you. For you.
And no, you guys are doing great. I think another thing that sort of came up as an observer to this process for me was, and I don't mean to keep going back to that word impact, but the impact of design and these designers on society, whether it's a society and community of designers or the broader, the general public. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, I know the word outreach came out a lot, and I think that in some cases, the fact that people, in the case of, say, Charles Harrison, who was somebody who, with the idea that everyone has recognized virtually everything he's designed, that was a very important thing to this jury. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the other winners in relationship to that.
Well, I guess going back to what I said, what I said before, it's like finding the, I mean, maybe that's not always the case, but finding design that impacts such a large scale of people, and in such a good way, it's it has to be rewarded in a way. It was for us. It was like everyone uses this, or everyone wants this, or everyone knew this, or everyone wanted to have the ViewMaster, or played with it, or uses Google, or we had this, and not because of that. There was a whole obviously encompassing of how great the design was, and how useful, and how well created, and look, and things like that. But overall, creating design that impacts masses is very, very powerful. And I think we all reacted very, kind of very into that. There are some selections here that I don't think fell into that impact. I think it was impact for us as a very different rather than a mass, because I mean there's the fashion design, it's very different. It doesn't go to the masses, but it was very much the beauty and the craftsmanship and the uniqueness of something we had never seen before. And that was the type of impact that we reacted towards that, rather than the, everyone wants this, So it was impact was used in different ways. It was just not the large scale of the product. It was more the impact that we felt. It was very different. Maybe it's not existed, or it's been done in a very different way. We didn't expect it. We were surprised. And I think that was a key, moment for all of us, when you were really walking through all these books and thinking like, this has really got me. There's something very different about this. And that was, and when you see other people reacting the same way, you're like, well, there's different something, here about that. So,
I think maybe another way of looking at it, rather than impact, is range. Because I think about the work of David Rockwell, for instance. And I remember Lauren, who's involved with media and is at Bravo, was struck by Rockwell's ability on the stage. Be able to kind of pack a stage and make it work the way he did. And I think the rest of the jury also thought about Rockwell and his ability in interiors, but also to expand the field of interiors, the fact that he's doing landscape design and public park design, that he can do something as kind of with as much mass appeal as the Kodak Theater, but also do very small-scale industrial design projects. So his work cuts across a kind of very broad swath of what it means to be a designer and have an impact on the interior realm. And this probably goes back to your earlier question about the kind of convenience of labels, because many of these people could have occupied different labels. Rockwell could have been in architecture as well as being in interiors. But thinking about range, someone like Laurie Olin, who's been able to reconfigure through his landscape projects our own Columbus Circle to make out of what was a kind of disastrous, you know, roundabout, and actually to turn it into something which looks like a parkland, or through the kind of simple device of making a ha-ha, this kind of ditch around the Washington Monument, allow access, and also a different way of apprehending something which is such a kind of common symbol, we don't see it anymore. But then he also does beautifully kind of poetic landscapes. So to think about the juxtaposition of the work over the 30 years of his career is impressive. I mean, he's really helped to kind of redefine the way we think about landscape architecture. He's really part of a group of architects, people like Ian McHarg, who have encouraged a more complex and porous way of thinking about landscape work.
Are there any designs or designers that, as when you were looking at their work as part of this, that you feel have inspired you as designers or creatives yourself?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I think overall, I mean, it's very hard to single out particular people, but I think it's just seeing the scope of work and the talent and the creativity and the beauty of the projects. I mean, some of them were just like, I don't know. I walked out of here feeling like, I'm so glad I chose this profession and I'm sticking to it. You know, like if you ever had doubted yourself, it's like, it's such a inspirational moment, and you know, it's the whole package. As you've seen all this work from people, and I had not been in a jury before, so for me it was like, with all the jurors, which are like, you know, professionals in the field, so inspiring, learning from them, learning from the people I'm looking at, and definitely, I mean, like even architects, I'm not, you know, I just look at architecture as like, I would live there, I would not live there, whatever. But I was,
Join the club.
yeah, you know, and I think that was like, you know, talking to people who knew about it and gave you a bit more of the history, and you know, looking at the scope of work. We always know so little about the designers. We know like they're one big product, and then we realize they've done all of these other things, and it's like for so many years, and you know, in so many ways. And I just thought it was definitely boosted, like, you know, the inspiration to like, I don't know. I mean, I could look at examples if that's what you want, but Mark, maybe you have some.
Yeah, I guess in thinking about the intelligence about design and the design process, so looking at people who came in as finalists, to look at someone like Michael Sorkin, who's written really provocative work, and that his writing goes back to the time that he was a columnist for the Village Voice, and really had a very kind of sharp edge about the relationship between the development of the city, politics, and real estate development. He introduced the kind of conversation about market forces in a very kind of profound way. And to think about Michael BIERUT, who is the winner in the category, who's also, beyond being a remarkably original and profound designer, his books about graphic design are compelling. So it was a kind of great smorgasbord to be able to, we were in this room, and so be able to sit around this room with people's portfolios and to be able to go through this. It was a very, very rich stew. You can only imagine what it's like to spend 2 days doing a kind of blitz through this many categories. I mean, it was kind of remarkable. But I found it very heartening because there are so many other voices besides standard market forces that kind of influence the way we think about the environment, the designed environment.
Okay, one more question before I turn it to the audience. It's a little harder one. If you could work, and I'm totally stealing it from last year's jury panel, if you could work in the studio of one of these designers for a year, who would you choose?
I'm a bit embarrassed to say this one because I know you just said he's here, but I would work in Scott Stowell's studio. I'm applying for a job here. I'm a graphic designer, and I feel that, you know, as a field in general, it's like, besides, you know, the studio itself, it feels like a place that it's amazing. It's just like there's a lot of really, really great work going out there. Good magazine has become like one of those must-have, must-read, touch, feel. The whole experience is very cool, and I don't know, I just feel that the work has been awesome. But you know, there's other people here that you would say, I would spend time there, see how they work. I mean, I would say like I would love to spend time with Antenna, and I would like, but you know, trying to touch myself to the field that I kind of know. I could be more realistic, maybe.
Yeah. It's a very tough. It's a tough question because you'd sort of like to think about yourself interning. And so I think about that like great moment after college, thinking about what you do, and so. You know, I'd love to know more about fashion and clothing construction. So thinking about going from structuring environments to structuring kind of the body is a very, very interesting thing. So to think about Ralph Rucci and his kind of fascination with kind of material and draping, and there are, for me, very, very close connections between designing environments and what we do in terms of clothing. But I could also see myself spending time in Laurie Olin's office and thinking about the ground against which we usually kind of design our cities or design our buildings. But each one of these people has something that would be great to know about. You know, Rockwell's stagecraft and theatercraft, also kind of fantastic. I remember a meeting with David Rockwell that took place in a theater, and it was during the rehearsals for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and it was something out of my kind of odd fantasy, MGM influenced fantasies, you know, like the outtakes from 42nd Street, sort of walking up into the darkness in the upper balcony and just slouching in our seats and sort of talking about stuff, and having John Lithgow and Joanna Gleason doing bows in front of us in this darkened theater. Kind of amazing. And I thought, well, this could be fun. This could be fun to enter into for a little while, you know.
Well, I think we'll turn it over to the audience because I'm sure you all have questions. And I just want to remind everyone that even if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to talk into microphones, that because we're webcasting this, we need you to, so that it will get picked up on that recording. So if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will get to you with a mic. And it would also be really helpful if you would stand up. And Paul, I don't know if you want to join us in case someone has a museum question.
Well, you're going to need that.
Oh, here she is, one for you.
Good.
I'll start off. I was curious to see that, well, obviously impact was a big theme to this year's jury, I gather. One of the constituencies that was not explicitly talked about was the environment. And certainly you could argue that, at least in American public awareness, I think we're probably past the tipping point where the environmental issue is not going to go away. So to the degree that it wasn't an explicit category that you juried against, I'm curious if that, whether in the portfolios that you saw and things that you considered, or whether that was an implicit thread to your consideration among certain projects, where certain categories, I would expect certain categories it was more prominent within.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious to hear your
It's
thoughts
actually,
on that.
it's a very, very good question. And there were portfolios of people who had done urban design, and there were people who had done proposals for landscapes and landscape planning, and there were also architects who certainly dealt with issues of sustainability and green building. But whether or not the work that was the most sustainable was either presented in such a way in portfolios so that it could be evaluated in the jury discussion, because we're working through a kind of host of material, and we generally responded to work that had a kind of graphic clarity and work that was directed at an audience that needed to go through a lot of material very quickly. And I think some of the planning projects and some of the projects that might have had a kind of finer grain about sustainability issues may have been more difficult to grab the jury as a whole. it's something that certainly should be kind of thought about, I think, as we think about design.
Well, the gentleman took half of my question, actually. As a design professional myself with 14 years experience in design, and now just having started out as a design recruiter, I have come to realize how much design has changed from the time when I went to school and started out in the design field. So with that, I realized, there is interaction design now as a whole design discipline. People are looking for specific lead designers, green sustainability. So I was wondering, as a category for next year, if there would be one category you wanted to add, what would that be in a design discipline?
Well, it's interesting that you use the word interaction, because I think one of the things that, and I don't sit through the whole jury process. I obviously talk to the jury at the beginning of the session, and I sit and share their thoughts and hear their feedback afterwards. But certainly the communications section, I think people felt was just so difficult to judge, book design against movie, title graphics. And I think certainly Tim Brown from IDEO felt that we should create an interaction category as well. But going to the point about the kind of sustainability question, like Caroline, I've sat through, or, dipped in and dipped out of the jurying process. And certainly over the years, and certainly I have heard and seen juries dismiss, particularly in the corporate achievement section, corporations where they felt that there was where there had been a very, very poor environmental record, or a very poor labour record, where there have been known instances of child labour use, and I'd seen people the jury bat those corporations out of the contest. But I think that, implicitly, I think good design should have that component of sustainability and responsibility. We shouldn't be making and awarding people who create superfluity in the world. That's not good design. So I think it is there. It's whether we actually then sort of pull out the category and say, okay, this is the Green Design Award. What does that say about the other winners? That they're not green? I think that there have to be certain sort of bedrock, sort of good citizenship principles that underlie each of the categories, and a degree of sustainability, albeit to Mark's point about the sort of the scientific evaluation that would need to be done in that sense. I think it's definitely sort of, I don't know whether it was hovering there in your jury as much as it has in other years, but certainly other juries, I think there has been that sort of, that coarse sieving.
It actually did come up, and this notion of an underlying ethics, or an importance placed on the civic realm, which has to be seen as including sustainability. And because you're quite right, we are in some ways past the point of no return. So there is a tipping point that's occurred, and it needs to be part of all of our conversations. My only reluctance in pulling something out would again be to say that that lets others off the hook, that somehow this is not something that needs to be dealt with in actually every category of our activity.
So you don't approve the tax holiday on gasoline between Memorial Day and Labor Day?
Great idea. Once again, doing marvelous things for non-political reasons in this country. Very good. That's good. So drive as much as you can this summer, because it will be cheaper, and then become good citizens after that. Did you see there was something on TV about this, about SUVs? And this was on Eyewitness News, a font of great information. And the through line was, well, perhaps driving SUVs is not the most energy inefficient thing to do, because it would cost you more to get a new car that was a hybrid, and the taxes you would pay in getting a new car and having to amortize that over your year's budget would therefore make it more costly. Now, of course, the overarching issue is, well, you know, there's this notion that we're really polluting, but they did it in strictly budgetary terms, and I thought, well, not a great story, you know. I think you've promised to put black bars over everybody's eyes so that they should feel free to ask the questions they want. Yeah.
As jurors, I know we've been grappling with whether or not we should ever go international with awards, and I'm curious if this is ever something, or in your you know, kind of jury process, if this was something that came across, if you had wished there had been that option, possibly?
Man, we only had 2 days. That's a huge thing. I mean, I always like the idea of looking at kind of world endeavors, and because we're not always, or often, not the kind of leader of the pack when it comes to certain understanding about design, how design functions. And in some ways, I'm of mixed minds. On one hand, designs like this can help begin to give a higher profile to American design and begin to make a case in sort of circles that it might not be immediately understood that design actually does matter, that there's value added through a kind of intelligence when approaching complex design problems. But there are so many fantastic things going on internationally that could be also sort of models for better behavior or more intelligent design. I mean, smart design, not intelligent design. I know where I come from.
I think it would be very interesting. I mean, I think internationally, my mind, that's the moment I'm thinking about Latin America, which is where I'm from, and it would be, you know, people from, you know, that part of the world would feel very like, it would be a very big accomplishment to be able to participate in an international, you know, design award in Cooper-Hewitt, Smithsonian, it's New York. I mean, it would be a huge value. I'm not sure the rest of the world feels the same, because I mean, there's, you know, other places that design gets rewarded in an amazing way too. So, but I do feel it would be huge, definitely very big. The jury should be very varied, so there's all sorts, you know, of understanding. But yes, I mean, why not? Maybe that's your next challenge.
I mean, if I was in London at the Architecture and Design Museum on the, where's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was there maybe 2 weeks after we had this jury, and I thought about the kind of design program that they've started, and it's also multiple design disciplines, and they do a small publication, and there's really an interest there in letting kind of corporate entities in the country know about these designers. And so I actually think the potential of having a kind of country-based emphasis on design could actually work, in that there could be publications that begin to disseminate this work in a wider way. I don't know if there have been publications in the process of doing the juries, just a little kind of chapbook that says, you know, sort of good design now, that could be sent out. I know in France they had done something like this with architecture, where the kind of interesting architects were collected in a book and then sent out to the CEOs of companies in France as a way of kind of disseminating the kind of work that's actually going on in the country, because there tends to be a split between designers who tend to be aware of the work that's going on, perhaps across disciplines, or at least within their own disciplines, and then the consumers of design who aren't often as savvy, which is the potential of having a program like this and also a museum like this.
I mean, I think it comes to the opening remark that Caroline Payson here made as Director of Education, which is, you know, this is our our most visible public program. It really is a public program that is one of advocacy. It is trying to educate both manufacturers and the general public and service industries that design improves the quality of life, and actually design is something that can give competitive advantage to you in your particular business. Now, I think you can do that very beautifully with examples of architecture by, Renzo Piano in wherever and Shigeru Ban in wherever. But I think the message for American citizens must feel more realizable and more something to which they can really identify if these are awards that celebrate companies that they might have heard of, or that make products that they might have seen or they might have used. I think it brings it much, much more home, back to home. And certainly in terms of kind of the international arena, everything that we do at Cooper-Hewitt is otherwise wholeheartedly international in focus, whether it's what we collect for our collections, whether it's the themes of exhibitions that we put on here, or other education programs are very international in flavor. But it's just this one moment where we do very much narrow the lens down and say, no, this is about America, and it's about America today, and what products you and services you yourself might have used, or buildings you might have experienced.
Hi. I think it's an amazing time for design right now. Design's having the opportunity to change organizations. We're not just something purely for aesthetic purposes anymore. We're finding design getting involved in the upstream of reorganizing corporations and business streams. It's really fascinating. That's one thing I was curious. Would you be able to ever judge that category one day? Because it's so intangible and it becomes so business. And on that same level, now that the world, every business, industry, and sector is understanding how not just industrial design, since I come from that world, I kind of think from that sense. But now that design is making that much more of an impact in business, I don't know if this is the right forum for this, but do you know if the American government supports this? Or, from what I've heard, a lot of other countries have in their government councils or chapters or committees that actively do everything in their power to support and advocate design. And other countries are competing feverishly for this, but yet here, I don't think that there's anything. And I know that, this awards program, in 2000, was started by the White House, right? The White House Millennium Council. So how active do you think the American government is now? And it'd be amazing if you guys could somehow bring them into this conversation.
Well, it's interesting. There is something called the National Endowment for the Arts, which some of you may have heard of. It still exists, and design is part of the program, and the design disciplines that are represented are industrial design, graphic design, landscape design, architecture, planning, and preservation of all of those disciplines. It's interesting because I don't know that enough Americans know that there is the potential for support, and I don't think there is a kind of great wellspring of support for this in government itself. I mean, Daniel Moynihan was probably the last kind of big booster for design of any kind, and that was architecture and civic design. It really does take someone in government who understands that there's an impact of good design that goes beyond sort of decorating things or making them look prettier, that it's that problem solving is an essential part of our lives as designers, and it's to our benefit as a country and a civilization to support this. Certainly the creation of an award like this at the Cooper-Hewitt, which is in fact partly governmental and partly not, is a nod to that. But I'm not sure that there's enough sort of potential support, actually both in the public's mind and certainly in government, that this is critical.
I also think that these ideas of a sort of central government drive for a particular thing, whether it's sort of literacy or design or whatever it is, I don't think that's in favour at the moment anywhere around the world. I mean, certainly in all Northern European countries, there are design councils, and MITI in Japan, you know, has a unit which is basically there to promote design to manufacturing industry, and its job is to win exports. And I used to work at the British Design Council, founded in 1947, totally with the objective of, you know, getting British industry back up on its feet after the war, making it competitive. How can we compete? We can't compete on labor costs. The only way we can compete is on added value through design. Whether it succeeded or not, I think we can see in the result of the British automotive industry. You know, clearly, people don't necessarily take a message from central government in that way, and I think that it's not something that's viewed in government particularly favorably at the moment. I think that everybody in the United States, anybody who's going to be in business in 20 years' time, understands that design is absolutely central to their business strategy. Otherwise, they are not likely to be in business. So I think that, you know, yes, with awards like the Cooper-Hewitt program, I hope that we can really kind of stress that need and that urgency in that sort of public advocacy role. But I don't see any government in the industrialized world, I think, suddenly, particularly not in the States, suddenly sort of saying, you know what, within our Department for Trade and Industry, we have to have a design council that will promulgate the message to manufacturers.
Don't be shy.
I have a question that we didn't really talk about earlier today. As a juror, what is it that really strikes you as a bit of insider information for any past or future sort of submissions? What is it that really, you
How many of
mentioned
you want to
graphic
apply
quality.
for?
You mentioned the graphic quality, but as this is archived on the web and we are having this program yearly, what is it that really provides that oomph for your selections?
I think Mark was referring at the submission of the actual portfolio. Some of them were extremely weak looking. So that definitely, if you're talking about design, your first, you know, impression is what you see through your eyes and what you're getting presented. So, you know, some of the reference to that. I was struck in a strange way about how graphic design was perceived by the jury overall. Because graphic design is a form of very, you know, let's say compared to what, you know, the people who are designing a subway car, it seems to be like the cute side of design, you know, the graphic elements of a poster and the book cover and things like that. And people were, you know, it was, for me, it was a bit of a struggle saying like, but this is amazing, it's just a book cover. I know that's the subway car, but so as a graphic designer, I realized like what a hard job we have out there, because it can get really overlooked because it's something you just absorbed very, very often, very daily, very, you don't realize how important and the impact that it's causing every single day. I didn't see anyone submitting packaging. I didn't submit anything like that. And I was like quite impressed since, you know, I had spent my career like doing that. Suddenly it was like all about this, you know, Google. And I was like, where's that graphic design that, you know, I prepared myself to go and do for the rest of the, you know, for the rest of my life. And it was that struck me. So I don't know for submission what I would recommend, but I would say taking into consideration how you can make it much more intelligent for people who don't see that as a impactful, you know, way of design. Basically, how can you submit in a much more important way rather than just photos in a portfolio? How can you think and take it to the next level so people see the impact of what you do? And I'm not sure if that needs to be attached with numbers of things that were produced and what happened. I don't know if you want to go into that, but you want to make sure that it shows, because I feel when you compare it to some like searching in a Google tool, I mean, nobody needs any numbers. People know it's out there. Everybody uses it. Whilst in other products, that gets overlooked.
I think when we were, I mean, it's interesting. It's sort of like dating, In some ways, you're looking at all of these kind of attractive things, and you need to be sort of drawn in. And then, or graduate school portfolios, that's probably a safer analogy. And so you look at these things, and then there are ones that catch your eye. But then when you look at it, the work actually needs to sort of be sustained. And so I think the projects and the portfolios that did best were those that, in a very graphic way, were able to create some kind of larger narrative about what kinds of things were critical or central to this designer. And even though the projects themselves were very different and they looked very, very different, one was able to understand the kinds of things that were important in this person's configuration of design practice. And so whether we were looking at Viewmasters or a kind of rideable lawnmower, there was a way in which, clearly in Charles Harrison's work, there was an interest in taking what had been kind of front guard design techniques and making them available for a mass market. And that was visible through all of his product work, though the projects themselves looked very, very different. There was the image that made all of us laugh was that kind of bubble hair dryer that was collapsible. It's really this awful looking thing. It's sort of like the War of the Worlds that comes down on your head. And, but you could see aspects of early modernist design translated for a mass audience with some actual level of authenticity, which was great. And so I think whenever you put together a portfolio, there needs to be some kind of through line that's understandable to those who are looking at the work.
Yeah, and I think as designers submitting design work, they should design their portfolio and create that as a piece of presentation of who you are and talk, it represents you. And there was very little of that, actually. I mean, there was more like the book, put there kind of thing. There were few that were like, oh, this is so interesting, you want to play with it while you look at it and engages you. I mean, they're sort of trying to sell themselves for you to pick them in a way, so they should work a bit harder on that.
Okay, I'm just giving people one more second. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming tonight and remind you that all of this is on our website, as is the blog. And please mark your calendars for National Design Week, which starts on October 20th. And as one final announcement, we're really excited. We have a wonderful program coming up with Corning Museum's Glass Lab, which will partner master glassmakers from the Corning Museum with some incredible designers. And just to sort of give you some of the connection with the NDA, some of those designers will include Francisco Costa, Boyne Partners, and Antenna, who will be working out in the garden. I'll let you go to the website and see the complete list of the designers, but they'll be out in the garden from May 17th to June 3rd, so we hope to see you back so you can come and participate in that as well. Thank you. And I'd like to thank our panelists.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Paul.